when you talk about a leader, a narcissist has the inability to deal with shame.
Right.
I want to understand what that means, because there's a lot of talk about shame.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, some people say that there's, and I spoke with Jim about this, there's toxic shame, and then there's healthy shame.
Right.
And I had Taylor Lau, New Testament scholar from Trinity, on, and he wrote a book called Defending Shame, going through Paul's letters, because Paul uses shame as an aspect of motivation. How do we then see this shame, and how does a narcissistic leader fail to deal with shame? What kind of shame are we talking about here?
So it can look a lot of different ways. Jim actually wrote a book on this called The Pandora Problem that Deeper Walk publishes. So if people want to take a deeper dive into this topic, there's a whole book on it. The idea here is, let's look biblically at, and Jim does this in Pandora Problem, is Absalom, David, and Saul. Okay, all three of them had moral failings. How did they deal with them? Saul and Absalom dealt with them like narcissists, and David handled it like a human, shall we say? Not, yeah, it's too harsh, but you know what I'm saying? He dealt with that with humility is really the word I was going for there. It came out wrong. So Saul, when he is told the kingship's going to be taken away from him, what's his first reaction? He's like, Samuel, at least go out with me in front of the elders so I won't look bad to them, right? What's his core concern? He doesn't want to look bad. So that's a narcissistic reaction. It's not, okay, I need to own this. What did David do? You know, he went into fasting. He was publicly humbling himself. He wrote a psalm about his repentance, right? He was very open about it. How about Absalom? Absalom was like, oh, if only I was in charge, everything would be better, you know. And so what's characteristic of people who can't handle shame is that they become very good at avoiding shame. And so you do that by deflecting it. And so the first strategy is to deflect the shame onto somebody else. So it might be right back at you. So if you say something about me and I'm like, well, me, you're saying that about me? Well, what about you? You know, that's a classic kind of narcissistic reaction. Or if it's, I tell people, if you're going to interview and you want to try to weed some of this out, a good question to ask is, tell me about a time when you experienced shame and how you handled it. Because a lot of times people will tell you a story of shame and then their punchline is, but when you really understand what happened, you know it wasn't my fault. And I'm like, well, that's a narcissistic answer, right? It's like, I don't, if the bottom line of every story is, and it wasn't my fault, right? That means I can't handle shame. I couldn't deal with that. And we run into a lot of this, right? So it affects our marriages, it affects our parenting, it affects our leadership. And so it's the opportunity. I remember when we were writing Rare Leadership together, Jim told me a story about being at a church where a guy was trying to shame him into taking a leadership role in something that Jim was not going to take. And after, you know, he just, you know, heaped the shame on him. And afterwards he was like, you just refuse to be shamed, don't you? And I'm like, he goes, yeah, and all those things touch base. They make me feel a little bit of shame, but I'm not going to be controlled by it. I can't let myself be controlled by the shame. So that's a mark of maturity, is that people can't control me with shame if I'm really living with maturity. There's some of us, if anybody puts any shame on us at all, we immediately capitulate. Well, they're going to do whatever they want because we can't handle that feeling. And so there's a lot of, you know, you talk about trolls on YouTube and that sort of thing. What they're doing, they're dealing in shame, right? They're trying to heap shame on you to see if they can get you to change who you are and what you do. So shame is a big issue, right? And that's why, and I think that for a lot of us, we didn't get much modeling on healthy ways of handling shame growing up. But it is at the heart of what we're talking about.
It is, and it has so many different ramifications, as you just drew out for us. So let me make sure I get this straight. When we're talking about shame, it could be toxic shame or healthy shame. It's more of our ability to deal and handle it in a proper way.
That's not quite what I'm saying, but I see why you say that though. So
okay.
what I'm
correct me.
Okay, so shame is something that I feel. Think about it, right hemisphere, left hemisphere of the brain. Shame is something I feel in the right hemisphere of my brain.
Okay.
It becomes toxic or healthy depending on what happens to the left hemisphere. That is the narrative that goes with it. And so I can feel shame. And if the narrative is, therefore I'm a terrible person, that's toxic shame. If I feel shame and the narrative is, therefore I should probably change what I'm doing, that's healthy shame, right? So it's the narrative that goes with it that makes it toxic or healthy. And so so somebody can be heaping toxic shame on me, right? Because they're giving it a narrative, right?
Mhm.
They're telling me why I'm so horrible and why this is all my fault and all this other stuff. And a mature person, they're going to feel it, but then they will find a way to get back to joy from there. So they're not just stuck in shame. And they're also not going to do it in a way where they just deflect it immediately to other people because I can't handle it.